Hello, I'm Jack Kessler. 90 years ago this year, a series of programs, regulations, public works projects, and financial reforms were introduced by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt to the American public. This would be collectively called the New Deal. And the goal of the New Deal was to help the U.S. recover from the Great Depression. We're on the campus of Emerald College in front of Ordway Hall, which was built thanks to the New Deal. So let's explore more on what the New Deal was and its impact here on the High Plains. In the beginning of 1933, the United States reached its all-time highest rate of unemployment at 25%, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. This was months before Franklin D. Roosevelt was inaugurated as the 32nd President of the United States. And after being sworn in, FDR moved swiftly on a plan to bring relief, reform, and recovery to the U.S., the New Deal.
It provided things like work relief for individuals who are unemployed, also did a whole host of other things, brought electricity to rural farmers in many parts of the South, sought to fix commodities prices for agriculture, sought to fix prices for, and sometimes literally fix prices in certain ways for industry in the Midwest. It was really a whole-scale and wide-ranging attempt to revive the U.S. economy during the dregs of the Great Depression in the early 1930s.
The New Deal is split into two segments, the first New Deal and the second New Deal. And the head of the Department of History at WTANMU, Dr. Tim Bowman, says the first New Deal was to provide short-term, immediate relief to Americans, while the second New Deal, which kicked off around 1935, focuses on long-term fixes. This platform would create a multitude of agencies to carry out the 3 R's of the New Deal.
This is where you see the creation of agencies like the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Works Progress Administration, the Public Works Administration, the National Youth Administration, and countless others.
Texas Historical Commission National Register historian Lisa Gergeski says funds from the New Deal were passed on to the counties, then to the local communities. She adds aspects of the New Deal still can be seen today.
The legacy of the New Deal, it depends on, how you're looking at it. If you're looking at things like Social Security, which are tremendously, impactful even today, and something that's very commonplace in society today. Or again, you see the Texas state parks, which are, everybody loves to visit them. They're wonderful resources, and we're so lucky to have them. So there's physical legacy, and there's, maybe things that are less tangible that we don't think about. But the New Deal touched a lot of different aspects of the economy.
Dr. Bowman says the New Deal also leaves behind a political legacy.
Small rift that develops in the 30s that I think gets bigger over time over this question of the government's role in people's lives. And, while that doesn't necessarily have everything to do with the New Deal, that is something that politically really rises to the fore. In the political divisions in the country today, a lot of those, I think, echo some of the things that supporters and critics of Roosevelt were saying as far back as the 1930s.
Since so many agencies were introduced during the New Deal, and with their use of acronyms, it resulted in being called alphabet soup or alphabet soup agencies. Dr. Bowman adds that it's hard to say if the New Deal would have ended the Great Depression. We have more from Dr. Bowman and what effect World War II played in the role of the Great Depression and the New Deal over on our website, myhighplains.com. Banks are significantly stronger due to lessons from the Great Depression and significant recessions. The banking system is stronger now than it has ever been. That is what President of Emerald National Bank, William Ware, told us. This after the United States banking system was in disarray in the 1930s. Whether it was Great Britain leaving the gold standard, runs on banks, and the uncertainty over the economic policies of the incoming President Roosevelt, the U.S. banking system was in desperate need of help. Here's more on the relief that Roosevelt brought and how banking still feels those impacts of those changes. According to Federal Reserve history, immediately after his inauguration in March, President Roosevelt called a special session of Congress the day after and declared a 4-day banking holiday that shut down the banking system, including the Federal Reserve, and this action was then followed a few days later by the passage of the Emergency Banking Act.
Before the banking system crashed, right, with the Great Depression, if a bank went under and you didn't get any of your money out before it closed its doors, you were just out of luck. So however much money you had in the bank, just poof, it was gone.
The Emergency Banking Act also broadened the powers of the president during a banking crisis and set standards for the reopening of banks. According to Paul H. Carlson in his book Amarillo, the Story of a Western Town, Amarillo's 4 banks, along with the rest of Texas's banks, were closed on March 2nd by Governor Miriam Ferguson. Amarillo's banks would reopen on March 15th after federal examiners inspected and declared them financially sound and solvent. According to Carlson, the bank saw long lines of people at the 9 a.m. reopening, with people depositing over $1 million into the banks. Months after the passing of the Emergency Banking Act came the Banking Act of 1933, or the Glass-Steagall Act. This act also separated commercial banking from investment banking and created the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation.
So when they now offered insurance to banks via the FDIC insurance program, they wanted to regulate those banks to make sure that that FDIC insurance was being handled properly. So after 1933, you started seeing a separation of those banks to where commercial banks and commercial banks and investment banks were separated and not allowed to do business together.
Matt Ramsey, Amarillo National Bank Senior Vice President and Senior Investment Officer, says since the 1930s, regulations have grown for banking.
Been many regulations piled on banks over the years. Banks are heavily regulated now and have been for years. So all of those different regulations were thought by the regulators and by lawmakers to make banks safer and deposits more safe for individuals.
According to Federal Reserve history, in 1999, Congress repealed large parts of the Glass-Steagall Act with the establishment of the Graham-Leach-Bailey Act, or the Financial Services Modernization Act. This eliminated the Glass-Steagall Act restrictions against affiliations between commercial and investment banks. On March 12, 1933, President Roosevelt would give his first fireside chat on the radio about the subject of the banking crisis. The New Deal touched many aspects of the American zeitgeist to prop up the economy and get people back on their feet. One facet of the New Deal helped was education. Here on the High Plains, the New Deal helped build schools and expand existing ones, helping those achieve knowledge in the process. The Public Works Administration was created by the National Industrial Recovery Act of 1933, and President Franklin D. Roosevelt created the Works Progress Administration with an executive order on May 6, 1935. In many respects, PWA projects resemble those of the WPA. Both conducted large-scale endeavors, and many institutes of education saw the benefits of the New Deal.
It modernized education in Texas. It provided new schools for rural areas who might have just had a one-room school before.
One of those institutes was West Texas A&M University, then called West Texas State Teachers College.
There's one newspaper they called WT, the college that the Great Depression built. And they said that really because the New Deal, that WT's administration took advantage of what the New Deal was doing. Buffalo Courts was the first athletic dormitory in the state of Texas, and it was built in 1934. The New Deal would pay students, I think the Works Projects Administration paid students to help build the facility. They built Stafford Hall. Stafford Hall was the first male dormitory on campus. It was built in 1936. They built Terrell Hall.
The Jenny Lind Porter Professor of History, Dr. Marty Kuhlman, says the New Deal helped WT survive the Great Depression.
At least part of the state was saying, do we even need WT? Or do we need it to do we need it to be a four-year college even during that time? And I think if it wasn't for the New Deal, that state might have got more of what they wanted, might have limited the rights of WT or the ability to be a four-year college.
In June 1935, Amarillo College, then called Amarillo Junior College, bought property from the Oliver Eckel estate located on Washington. The college had been operating out of the Amarillo Municipal Auditorium since its opening in 1929. The college had been seeking a PWA authorization for $100,000 to be used on a new campus and building, and in July that arrangement was declared satisfactory. In August, the board passed a resolution authorized by board president Joe Dooley to execute and file an application with the U.S. for a grant to aid in the building of a 2-story junior college with a gymnasium. Building on the junior college would start in 1936 and would open in 1937, and it wasn't until the end of 1939 when the gymnasium was completed after another application to the PWA. All of this according to the book, The AC Story, Journal of a College by Joe F. Taylor. Both buildings are still standing at Amarillo College as Ordway Hall and Russell Gymnasium. One of the oldest schools in Amarillo also saw improvements from the New Deal. According to documents obtained from Klein, a PWA application was applied for in 1938 for a gymnasium. Horseman Middle School or Horseman Junior High had a gymnasium constructed in 1939. A PWA application was also applied for in 1938 to build a school in Amarillo. That school wasn't completed until 1941 and was the Horseman Primary Unit, later renamed in the 1950s to Ralph Waldo Emerson, according to Amarillo ISD, and is now currently Johnny and Allen 6th grade campus. Palo Canyon is a wonder here on the High Plains with its natural rock formations and vast history covering thousands of years. But a piece of that history is how Palo Canyon became a state park and how the Civilian Conservation Corps, or CCC, helped with that. I headed down to Palo Canyon to get an inside look at the CCC's work and how they're still dotted across the canyon. In early 1933, Fred A. Ermey agreed to transfer most of the more than 15,000 acres of land he owned and what we now know as Palo Canyon State Park to the Texas State Parks Board with the use of a proposed loan from the Federal Reconstruction Finance Corporation. That loan would be repaid from park operation income. However, after President Roosevelt's inauguration, officials of the National Park Service saw Palo Canyon as a likely site for one of the anticipated 1,300 initial CCC projects. That loan was then abandoned, and the Texas State Park Board purchased the land from Ermey, kickstarting the CCC's work.
So you see, the tremendous expansion of the Texas park system during this time. So CCC workers were employed to go out and build cabins and lodges and build roads and so forth. Even at Palo Duro State Canyon, at Palo Duro Canyon State Park near Amarillo, that's one of the main New Deal state parks. And so you see this tremendous creation of different infrastructure, providing public access to those natural resources.
According to the Texas State Historical Commission, the first 3 companies of CCC enrollees, made up of World War I veterans, would arrive in July of 1933, and after setting up their camp, their first task was to construct the road from the rim of the canyon to its floor. From 1933 until 1937, 1,200 men would work at Palo Canyon with the CCC to build public buildings and cabins, roads, bridges, culverts, as well as hiking trails.
First thing you're going to notice about our CCC structures here is, of course, that sort of cobblestone-esque architecture that you can see behind us here. So whether that's on the roadway here, on some of our trailways like the CCC trail, that sort of cobblestone-esque architecture, that's all made out of the Tasajillo sandstone here from the canyon.
The formal opening of the nearly 1.5-mile rim to bottom road was observed in November of 1933, and Palo Canyon State Park would formally open on July 4th, 1934. Many of the CCC structures that were built are still standing or still in use at Palo Canyon.
It's super important that we have these facilities here, the CCC structure, still intact, because it really shows the sort of ingenuity, if you will, of the men who came here to help build up our state park. Their perseverance, because this would have been really hard work for them to not only carry all that heavy stone, to not only build the structures like we see here, but the roadway as well. So it really is a testament to sort of their endearing spirit here, and also to what they built up here.
According to Texas Historical Commission, the CCC project at Palo Canyon State Park was one of the few to include workers from each of the 3 special groups: veterans, African Americans, and juveniles. And if you want to learn more about the CCC and what they did at Palo Canyon, the park has an exhibit located at the El Coronado Lodge Visitor Center, which was built in 1934 due to the CCC. During these New Deal stories, we've talked a lot about the projects and the people that helped around the Panhandle. But there were two men that were instrumental in getting the projects to the people of the High Plains and getting them built. That'd be Alson Asa Meredith and Guy A. Carlander. You know the name Meredith because of Lake Meredith, and Carlander's buildings literally dot the sky of Amarillo. We have more on these unsung heroes of the New Deal here on the High Plains. Long before Alson Asa Meredith, otherwise known as Double A Meredith, devoted himself full-time to getting a dam and reservoir on the Canadian River to furnish water for the Panhandle, he was the area director for the Works Progress Administration.
He was putting down the curbs in this neighborhood. So if you walk around through Oliver Eckle and in the Wolfland and even into San Jacinto, you're going to see stamped on the curb Works Progress Administration. That was A.A. Meredith. He was putting people to work.
He would be transferred to Amarillo in 1916 when he was working for the Gulf Refining Company. He would later move to Plainview in 1931, but returned to Amarillo a few years later to take charge of the Potter County Relief Program. And in 1935, he was appointed to that area director position. According to the Texas State Historical Association, the WPA helped pave streets, construct sidewalks, along with other projects in Amarillo, and $400,000 in federal funds that Meredith obtained went to support building projects at West Texas State Teachers College, now West Texas A&M University, and the Panhandle Plains Historical Museum.
The Panhandle Plains Museum, which is just, a parking lot over from this building, was first opened in April of 1933, and that building, or that museum, which is one of the most important history museums in the state, would not have been kept afloat were it not for WPA workers, Works Progress Administration workers who were helping with archaeological digs, scientific work.
Guy A. Carlander moved to Amarillo in 1919 as an employee of the Santa Fe Railroad, and he would set up his own architectural firm in 1920. By the 1930s, Carlander was already a well-known and prominent architect, with him designing buildings like the Fisk Medical Arts Building, Northwest Texas Hospital, and First Baptist Church.
He was not only a good designer, he was a good kind of engineer of a functional building that can sustain 100 years. Right? So if he's building in the 20s, we're now in the 2020s, and it's still functional. Now, some things have needed updates, but I think that he's still people still appreciate his aesthetic. It's not out of date. It still feels regionally important and, like I said, kind of modern.
In the 1930s, he helped Amarillo College get their own campus by designing what would become Ordway Hall and Russell Gymnasium. Carlander would also be integral in what the buildings at Palo Duro Canyon State Park would look like by designing the El Coronado Lodge and several smaller buildings around the canyon, according to Peter L. Peterson in the book The Story of Palo Duro Canyon by Dwayne Guy.
He was the person who built the lodge, and so the lodge that we see when we go there, that's his design, but he had bigger plans for it too, and we have some of his drawings and even a little postcard that shows he wanted to expand it with this giant smokestack, and it never got done.
According to Llano Cemetery, Carlander was also a key part in improving the grounds during a 1933 project that was largely financed by two New Deal programs, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation and the Civilian Conservation Corps.
These guys came along at a weird time in our country's history when we had this horrible situation. These guys saw an opportunity to enlist the government support to make our community better. And the things they did were not just stopgap measures. They gave us something for generations to enjoy.
According to TSHA, in 1941, Meredith moved to Borger and was elected city manager. As city manager, he engineered tax reform measures to curb financial instability brought on by the Great Depression. And Carlander would continue to design various projects in Amarillo and around the High Plains throughout the rest of the 1930s and into the coming decades. During President Franklin Roosevelt's presidency, he looked to calm nerves and explain policies by speaking directly to the American public through the radio. He did this with fireside chats, designed as a way for the president to talk with listeners. Here's more on the chats and the reassurance that they brought in a time of difficulty. Between 1933 and 1944, President Roosevelt gave upwards of 30 fireside chats to the American public, with the first fireside chat being about the bank crisis.
He got people believing in him, and he did that primarily through what are called fireside chats, which were where he spoke directly into Americans' living rooms through the radio and told them to gather around to the radio, and he would explain things like the Emergency Banking Act and things that he was he was going to do.
According to the University of Virginia, an estimated 60 million people listened to that first fireside chat. WTANMU Associate Dean of Communication, Art, Theater, and Dance, and an expert on organizational crisis communication, Dr. Christina Drumheller, says that these chats provided transparency to the American public.
And in crisis communication, we would argue that is one of the best things that you could do, right, is to be transparent, let audiences know what's going on. We talk in terms of stakeholders, so who has a stake in the message that you're sending, and for a president, you're talking about not only the whole country, but often a global message.
According to the Census Bureau, in 1930, approximately 40% of the U.S. population owned a radio.
Now, it didn't necessarily help everybody. If you can't afford to eat, you probably can't afford a radio either, right? So there are limitations to what our messaging can do, especially through medium like that. And so there are plenty that FDR didn't reach. And I think that's an important thing. We do talk about things like two-step flow theory. It's a little outdated now, but would somebody hear the message and then share it with others who maybe didn't have radio? And what did that look like?
The fireside chat's legacy would continue after FDR, with nearly all presidents since using radio, television, and even social media to speak to the nation.
So when you can use the radio well, when you can use TV well, because TV had the same thing. When TV comes out, it started to be, oh, you have to look good if you're going to come across well, right? So that changes the way you're going to do your message, right? Social media. Oh, I only have 144 characters, or I only have 260 characters, or whatever each level gave you. How do I create that message? How do I give a short blip that is effective?
According to Christopher H. Sterling, the term fireside chat comes from CBS broadcaster Harry Butcher on the occasion of the second one. And during the first fireside chat, the broadcast was from the White House's diplomatic reception room, with President Roosevelt actually sitting next to a fireplace. The New Deal touched nearly every aspect of American life in the 20th century. This includes public works that span across the nation, including right here on the High Plains. It can be difficult to document the thousands of sites and projects the New Deal helped build, but one nonprofit corporation affiliated with the Department of Geography at the University of California, Berkeley is trying their hardest to do so. I was able to learn more about the Living New Deal and their mission to keep history alive. The Living New Deal started as a book project on the WPA in California, but soon outgrew the original intent as the vast extent of the New Deal public works projects became clear.
We were focused on California at that time for the first few years, and it was only around 2010 that we decided to go national once we realized how big this thing really was.
The executive director of the Living New Deal project, Richard Walker, says that the project serves three purposes.
Living New Deal is a project to document what the New Deal did, particularly public works, which were never adequately documented at the time. Then to educate Americans about the legacy of the New Deal, much of which is still there all around them. And then to, educate policymakers and important people about the usefulness of New Deal models of policies like the CCC, WPA, and so on for today.
Walker says the Living New Deal also helps connect people across the nation to the past.
So the importance is if you put it under people's noses and say, look, it's right there. You've been using that park down the street, taking your kid there for years. That was the New Deal worked on that. Maybe the New Deal created it. So it gives you a new appreciation. It's a way of connecting people to the past in a direct way, and then connecting them to the idea that public investment, government public investment, is a good for everyone. It benefits ordinary Americans.
The Living New Deal has documented over 18,000 New Deal sites, and Walker says it's like a giant scavenger hunt.
We have an online map. That's how we started, was mapping these projects. We have a wonderful interactive online map. It's got little icons and color coding and ways of searching for whatever you want.
Walker says they have volunteers all over the country that help with the project, but he says this is a public project.
Just our team or our official volunteers, we have people, random people, who will go to our website and fill out the form and send us a photograph, do a little research on their own and send us the materials, and we put it up. It's a totally public project with public crowdsourcing, participation, improvement, feedback, and the idea is to get American people out there to learn history, but to do it in a way that's really enjoyable.
Walker adds they're also looking for New Deal stories, such as a grandfather who was in the CCC or a grandmother who taught for the WPA in local schools. He says it's a nice way to memorialize what a family did in their local community. He adds the Living New Deal has done a pretty thorough job in New York City and Washington, D.C., along with the greater Los Angeles area, but he adds that the New Deal projects are everywhere. To take a look at the New Deal map and what other projects were built around the Panhandle that the Living New Deal has discovered, you can go to our website, myhighplains.com.